Hello, Life Church Livonia, and welcome to Tell Me More. On this podcast, we take a deeper dive into the texts, often from the weekend, and or topics that we think are crucial to discipleship. Because in our lives, it's not been the event or the destination that has been the life shaper, but all the conversations surrounding it along the way. It wasn't the
Mm-hmm.
sermon or the conference or the event. It was all the conversation with friends and family surrounding those things that made them really sink into our hearts and create change. And so we're hoping to provide some of those same conversations here as we journey together to follow Jesus. So I'm joined by Kate today. What up, what
What
up?
up, what up, what up, everybody?
And we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 16, which is the last chapter in our series on the book of Mark. In 2 weeks.
Babo did
Babo!
such a great job this weekend. Shout out to Babo.
Babo hoy! In 2 weeks, we're going to be starting our new series on the Sermon on the Mount called A New Way to Be Human. And I'm really looking forward to that. I think there's going to be some real good stuff to dive into with the Sermon on the Mount on this podcast in particular. But today, we're finishing one thing, not starting another. So we're going to be finishing up Mark 16.
That's it. That's where we stay.
Now, Kate, neither you nor I preached this.
Nope, sure didn't. Not an expert over here.
So what we're going to do is what we normally do when one of us didn't preach it. We're going to observe the text for ourselves and ask questions and make observations and do a little bit of a Bible study on this text. And I think Bob's observations are always so unique and fresh to me. I really love his perspective on things. So hopefully we're just as cool today, but probably not.
Probably not. I'm not showing up with cool, but I'm showing up. Here I am.
And we're happy for that.
Yes, maybe.
Oh,
We'll see.
Most likely happy for that. It's hard to say at this point.
Feel certain it's one way or the other, though.
Do you? I'm happy that we're certain about something.
I'm certain about that.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, Mark 16.
Mark 16. All right. So it begins with verse 1. Go figure. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go to anoint Jesus's body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe on the right side, and they were alarmed. Don't be alarmed. Very good. That was a great alarm.
Thank you.
Don't be alarmed, he said. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. They were there for that. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him, but go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Very good. All right, Kate, give me some observations. What we got going on here? Whoops, sorry.
Well, in the beginning, it says that when the Sabbath was over. So that just stands out to me that they were, that they took Sabbath seriously, even in the middle of something as important and transformative as Jesus's crucifixion. So I observe that they waited until the Sabbath was over. I just made an observation that they went together. That there were people, because Mary could have gone, or Salome could have gone, but they waited until the end of Sabbath, and then they went together. And Bob already preached about this, and we talked about it in our Take Two Tuesdays, that they didn't really have a complete plan when they got there, and I just really noticed that.
Right.
Yeah, so those are some of my initial observations of the text. I think that I always look for feelings in scripture. So alarmed, I think alarmed is fear. And just recognizing, observing feelings, not necessarily trying to understand what's behind them or what's going on, but They had fear, and it led to physical manifestation of that because they were trembling and bewildered. So that was like a physical manifestation of their fear.
Yeah.
And I think noticing that about ourselves too is interesting, so just observing those things in the text. And how about you? What were some of the things that you observe?
It's interesting. It says Mary, the mother of James, because there is a James the disciple, but there's also James, Jesus's brother.
Yeah.
And I wonder about who this Mary is, because
Which one?
yeah, because Jesus, we know Mary, so what they're doing when they bring spices, you bring spices to the body so it doesn't stink,
Mm-hmm. And
right?
after 3 days, that body about those things.
Hence why they're bringing spices,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And Mary, the mother of James, one of the interesting things to me is when Jesus is on the cross, he says to John, who's the only disciple there to witness the crucifixion, he looks at his mother, Jesus's mother, and Jesus looks at John and says, woman, now this man is your son. This is now your mother. And he kind of gives his mother away so she isn't wanting, because she's a widow, remember?
Yeah.
Joseph's dead.
Yep.
So he passes Mary to John to be taken care of, and asks John to take care of her needs. And so I'm wondering if that's why it would say Mary, the mother of James, is that there's this kind of, Jesus has kind of given his mother away, separated himself from her in
Mm-hmm.
some sense. So I think it might be Jesus's mother. I'm just curious about that. And
Yeah.
then I'm also so curious about who's Salome.
Yeah. I've not ever heard of her. I was going to ask that question today because I was like,
Yeah.
I've not heard of Salome.
Yeah.
I mean,
But she got the spices.
yeah, she
Spicy
brought them.
Salome.
Yep.
Good old spicy
Yeah.
Salome.
Yeah. Sounds like a new salami.
Yeah, she's the Italian disciple.
Yes, that fits. Very apropos.
Yeah, for sure. So I just wonder, Mary Magdalene, totally get why she came.
Yep.
That makes sense.
She's
Mary the
in
mother
it.
of Mary the mother of James. I don't know.
Which one?
And
Who that?
who you, Mary? And Salome, similarly, like, how do you know Jesus? Why is this important to you? Are you just a
Yeah.
friend of the other Marys?
Mm-hmm.
But you got to believe the other Marys. Because Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. You got to believe they're probably friends because of Jesus, not like from any other experience together.
Sure, totally.
So that was something I noticed very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, meaning they got up before sunrise
Mm-hmm.
to prepare to come and anoint Jesus's body.
Yep.
They're on the way to the tomb. They ask each other who's going to roll away the stone. I love that observation. They don't really have a plan. Although we know that guards were guarding the tomb. So
yeah,
maybe they were going to ask the
they
guards.
had some tentative plans. They were loosely built, but nobody was like, this is the plan. Who's going to execute the plan? It was like, well, I don't know. We'll see when we get there.
Yeah. Yep. But I also think that there's a beautiful metaphor in that they are going to be with Jesus. What do you say? Posthumous? Is that the right word? Like after death? Is that?
Oh, don't ask me.
Okay. I know humerus is also a bone, so I don't know if that's the right phrase. Someone will know. Comment in the comments. Let us know. Shoot us an email.
Let us know.
Yeah. Posthumous? I can't remember.
No,
anyway,
it's not post. I'll look it up while you talk. Keep going.
Thanks. Good talk. So anyway, they're coming to be with Jesus even after his death. And one of the things I think is beautiful about that is
you're right. Posthumously, that's right. You got it.
Have an L in it?
Yeah, humously.
Okay.
Humously.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I threw an
Keep
R
going.
in there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they come to be with Jesus, and God figures out every other piece of the puzzle. And I just think that that's such a great metaphor for life. That when I come to be with Jesus, he kind of figures out the rest of it. And I think that's what happens here. And I like that a lot. Looked up, saw a man was very large, had been rolled away, entered a tomb. Young man, dressed in white robes, sitting on the right side. They were alarmed. Don't be
Mm-hmm.
alarmed. One of the things I think it's interesting um, is how often both God and angels, basically every heavenly being, says, "Don't
Mm-hmm.
be afraid."
Right. So often, almost
Right?
every time an angel appears, that's like their first sentence is, don't be scared, which tells
Hmm.
me they're not like these white, flowery angels with the wings and the pretty. They're like terrifying beings.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And that
Yeah.
I think there's something too, that I don't know if this is true, but this is kind of the only framework I have to like understand it. When um somebody says something that's just so clear and true that you just kind of have nothing else to say after that because it's just like it's the truth so well spoken.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and there is this power that truth and life and light have that just make you in awe of it. Like the power of life is in a baby, where you just are amazed at it,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's not doing anything.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that,
Babies is a great example because they're just like so cute usually,
yeah.
or like beautiful or awe-inspiring that you just like look at them. You just
Right.
look at them.
And they're awe-inspiring whether or not you think they're cute. It's just like
It's
amazing that they exist.
it's like the Grand Canyon. You just
Yeah.
like stare
Yeah.
and you try to take 100 pictures to capture it and you just can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's something about beings from heaven because God is life and he is light and he is truth. And
Mm-hmm.
when you are like, Moses was in God's presence for just a little bit and like people couldn't even look at him
Yeah.
because it was just so
It's
intense.
radiant and
Right.
glowing.
And he's
Mm-hmm.
literally radiating truth and life and,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
light. And so that's kind of what I always think. And there's something terrifying too. And it happens to me periodically where like I'll be listening to a sermon or in a conversation with deep with somebody or reading something on theology, and somebody will just say something that's so true. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost scary, even if it's not bad.
Right.
It's just like, it just makes me like, whoa.
Can you think of an example of when that happened?
Mm. I can't, but there are times when people will just preach the gospel with such great, there's not anything special they say. And I think
Right.
that's what I'm getting at is like,
Yeah.
it's not even the words they're saying, but there's just like a power in it in the moment that is just
Sure.
like kind of hits you in the chest.
Yep.
So anyway, I
That makes
think that
sense.
there's something about these heavenly beings where that potency of light and life and truth is just so intense
Mm-hmm.
that it's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. And I think
Yep.
there's some of that that's like there's the it's so powerful that it's neither good nor bad to a degree. You know what I mean? Like a hurricane is not inherently good or bad. It's just so insanely strong um, that whatever it touches is changed by it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that
Pretty
there's a degree to
catastrophically.
that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and do you think that was the alarm that
Yeah.
this guy was representing in this
Right. I
scenario?
think it's why they
Yeah.
always have to say don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Because the power of them, like I remember I went horseback riding in the Dominican Republic,
Mm-hmm.
and the power and size of the horse was so scary because it was just I knew I had no power over it.
Mm-hmm.
If it was going to listen to me, it would be out of um, clear commands it had been trained to obey. But
Yeah.
really, it's out of its own, not goodwill, but like training. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
have no real influence here.
Right. Right.
And there's
I feel that
nothing.
way with toddlers sometimes,
Mm,
like, you are just going to do whatever you daggone well want.
yeah.
So good luck to me.
So anyway, yeah. So I think that there's a degree of that here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why they always have to preface like, hey, don't be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the C.S. Lewis, like, he's not safe, but he's good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that
Yeah.
there's a fear at the lack of control you realize you have over this
Yeah.
situation and this person. Well, the other thing that always strikes me is he says, "Go tell his disciples and Peter."
I know. I just think that's so interesting. Like he's separate. He's different. He's not a
Because he left,
disciple. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The denial. He's like, I don't know Jesus. I don't follow Jesus. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know Jesus. I'm not one of them.
Yep.
And, God gave Peter and Judas kind of the grace to leave.
Mm-hmm.
But where Judas is so ashamed of himself, he's not willing to receive forgiveness. Peter is willing to receive forgiveness.
Yep. Yeah.
And, I think that's one of Peter is, I wouldn't say he likes being humiliated, but he
Yeah.
certainly is willing to press in even when he is humiliated.
Yep. Yeah. We do see that in his behavior and all throughout the text.
So, I think that that's part of what I've seen keeps people from Jesus is they don't want to be humiliated by their own choices. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a great example of the truth being scary.
Yeah.
That it's just like so clear that my choices have been wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm terrified because of how true that is.
Yep. That's a good example.
Yeah, there we go. So trembling and bewildered. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, where the women, because we read this verse, they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Even though right above this in verse 7, it said he tells the women, like, go and tell people, but they're like, nope.
Yeah, isn't it funny how often we want to do the opposite of what God says?
Yeah, well, funny.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, every time Jesus tells people after he heals them, like, don't tell anybody.
Don't tell anybody about
First thing they do is go tell everybody.
Blabber
and now this guy's here and he's like, go tell everybody.
And they're like, no,
I don't want to do that.
We're not going to say anything to anybody because we're scared. And who knows what kind of persecution they would encounter. It's so culturally relevant to how they're treated and considered. So they're like, no, we can't do that.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, they do end up telling them somebody, though.
Yeah, they do. But I just think that's an interesting observation. So they're like, probably not.
And then I loved Bob's whole thing on the earliest manuscripts. Other ancient witnesses don't have these verses. I think that's so great that the way he talked about that.
Yep.
And so if you want to know more about that, go listen to Bob's sermon. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Yep.
Good talk, Kate.
The end.
When Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him and who were mourning and weeping. When they heard that Jesus was alive and she had seen him, they did not believe it. Any thoughts there, Kate?
Well, I mean, right above this, it's like, no, we're not going to tell anybody. And then down here, we see Jesus tells Mary to go. And so then she did. And they didn't believe her. It's like, so why did I bother doing it anyway? Is what I would personally think. Like, okay, well, what good was that, Jesus? Smart mouth. Let me smart mouth off to you, Jesus, because that's fitting for me. But I do think that she went and told those who'd been with him and who were mourning and weeping. So I think that it's possible that they just thought that she was offering platitudes, right? Like, he's not dead, he's alive, and they didn't see it themselves. And so they could have experienced that as like dismissive to their grief. And if we think culturally, what did the Jewish people do? They sat Shiva, which is sitting in grief for, I think, was it 7 days? I don't
remember the number of days, but
it's like
a
minute.
Week. Yeah. There's different stages to it.
Okay. I'm gonna look that up. I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah. Look it up and I'll take over it. But I think that's great.
Yeah.
Observation, right? Because they sat on the floor with no chairs. And then after a certain amount of time, they moved to chairs. But it's like a 3-stage process, if I remember. I have a book here on it called House Sabbath.
I
which
would
is
love
great.
to read that.
It's not all about that, but basically this woman grew up as a conservative Jew and then converted to Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
and then wrote a book as from a Christian perspective on Jewish spiritual disciplines, and how because there were parts of those Jewish spiritual disciplines she really longed for and missed and felt like provided such stability for the spiritual life, even though there were times she didn't like them as a kid,
Yeah.
and so it's Christian reflection on Jewish spiritual disciplines, and it's really good.
Yeah, I'd love to read that.
House Sabbath.
Yeah.
So anyway, she talked about that in there, and are you looking it up, or
yeah, I did. I looked.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I looked it up. I can't tell. I'm looking at your face. Did you do it? Are you doing it? Did you know? So it says there's traditional customs related to observing Shiva or sitting Shiva in the home. So there's a washing of hands, which symbolizes separating ourselves from the spiritual impurity of death. The Meal of Condolence is a traditional meal following the burial. This meal usually includes hard-boiled eggs, which serve to symbolize the cyclical nature of life. The meal is to be arranged by friends or family. Prayer services. It's typical to hold services at the mourner's home. A minyan, a quorum of 10 should be present at each service so the mourners can say Kaddish. Covering mirrors. Mirrors often are covered in a Shiva house. Covering mirrors represents the mourner's focus on spiritual rather than physical reflection. Shiva candle, a candle that is lit upon return from the cemetery and burns for the entire length of the traditional 7-day Shiva. So that's like 7 a days. Topical overview of.
Yeah, there you go. So they're probably going through that right now. One of the things that strikes me too about Mary Magdalene says, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. And 7 generally represents completeness. It's often God's number. And so the idea that she had 7 demons means like she was completely demonized.
Right? Interesting.
Like, totally living a demonic life, essentially. And so this Mary Magdalene, as many of you, I'm sure, who are listening, she lived a life that was totally defined by a demonic way to live, a way that is characterized by sin that brings death. And when Jesus freed her from those demons, her life turned all the way around.
Yeah.
That's
beautiful.
The freedom she found, and I don't necessarily see that it could have been an exorcism in the sense that we might think of like on TV, but it also could be that there were many things. We know she was a prostitute, right? So there's I had a teacher in college who actually was an exorcist, describe demonization and possession to us in the class as we were talking about passages like this. And he said demons are like flies. They don't make garbage, they're just attracted to it.
Ooh.
And I think that that's true. And that's what I've seen, is that it's not like she has problems because she has demons. It's the demons are there to feed on and make the problems worse.
Well, and doesn't that go with the verse about ridding ourselves of the demons or the evil spirits, but if we don't clean the rooms, they come back double fold, or whatever. They're
not the source of the problem,
right?
They're just there to enhance the problem.
And I think that's so true with our sin nature. And, with my own, I would say it's like quitting alcohol or drugs. If I don't deal with the reason why I used those coping mechanisms, those unhealthy behaviors, then I'm just going to fill that space with something different, whether it's relationships or compulsion to work obsessively. it can be just insert new dysfunctional behavior here. And I think those are demons. I think that's a
100%.
spiritual war.
It's always both, right? It's always
Mm-hmm.
both. But and I feel like I can feel it. I feel like when I have the fleeting thoughts or impulses or urges that I just know are not my own.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it's almost like it's that addiction feeling where there's
compulsion.
a craving to do it that goes way beyond your own need, or even like a cognitive desire too.
Yep.
Right. So anyway,
scary.
Jesus frees her. Yeah. I mean, to some degree, yeah. I think it should be scary because it's sin, you know.
Yeah. It's not debilitating fear, but when we meet our fear with faith and wisdom, then it doesn't reign. It doesn't take over. We can do the work to purify that room, if you will, for Jesus to replace that with healthy behaviors. And
right. So Jesus told, if we were to put this in like kind of modern day terms, Mary, so she is a sex worker. That could be for a lot of reasons we don't know. It could be an addiction to sex that comes with the security of making money. So it could be an addiction of some kind. It could also be simply her own view of herself being embodied, right? It could be a lot of things.
Self-worth. Yep, totally.
We don't know her whole story, but we know that she met Jesus, and when she met Jesus, her whole life changed. And the idea of the 7 demons is that it changed completely.
Yep.
Nothing is the same.
Yeah, I love that representation, that numerical understanding. It's cool.
Yeah. So she went and then told those who had been with him and who were mourning and weeping. And when they heard that Jesus was alive and she had seen him, they did not believe it. This is also, I think, a beautiful representation of what it means to follow Jesus. I feel like so much of following Jesus is doing something that it doesn't work on your own, and that like God in his own time makes those things work. Like, whether it's preaching the gospel or whether it's like the prophets in the Old Testament proclaiming a truth, that there is always human pushback to what God is doing. And that's not, the result is not our part. It's the obedience, and then God handles the result in his own time. Do you want to take up verse 12 and read there, Kate?
Afterward, Jesus appeared in a different form to 2 of them while they were walking in the country. These returned and reported it to the rest, but they did not believe them either. Later, Jesus appeared to the 11 as they were eating. He rebuked them for their lack of faith and their stubborn refusal to believe those who had seen him after he had risen. He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name, they will drive out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes with their hands. And when they drink deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all. They will place their hands on sick people and they will get well." After the Lord Jesus had spoken to them, he was taken up into heaven and he sat at the right hand of God. Then the disciples went out and preached everywhere. And the Lord worked with them and confirmed his word by the signs that accompanied it.
Yep, that's awesome.
Yep. What do you observe? What do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think it is probably likely this wasn't originally part of the book of Mark, because these pieces here are all referencing the endings of other gospels. Right? So I think it's in Matthew when Jesus appears to Mary. And then this is the road to Emmaus. I can't remember which gospel that's in, and then this is when Jesus appears and they're in the locked room and Thomas isn't with them. Or maybe this is when Thomas is with them because Judas is dead, hence the 11. But I think that, the church, because this is in other gospels, the question isn't, did Mark himself write all this? The question is this account true? Because it's not like we're here to worship Mark, right? Mark is a gospel because we believe that his account is true and that it's historically accurate to what happened.
So did he observe these things and see that they were in other texts and just write an account that lined up with it?
Probably not. No, because his was first. His was
Right.
the very first gospel. So it's likely that people who had the gospel of Mark, because all these things still happened while Mark was alive. It's not
Right.
like they happened later. So it's totally possible he went back and added to his own letter. Totally possible.
Possible.
It's also possible that other people who the letter was circulating to added to it because they knew these things were true. Because they were living them, right? Or it's possible that because Mark ends so abruptly, the church decided, even like at the end of Paul's life or something, to complete the gospel with what happened after Mark finished writing it. Because Mark finished writing it first, it's hard to say, even with like the ascension and all that stuff, how much he even knew. He knew Jesus had been risen, right? But like, what else does he know? And so anyway, it's hard to say. But
and we don't really know, right? Like,
yeah, but it, like Bob said, it doesn't really matter because
yeah.
these, even confirmed by other biblical texts, we know these events happened. And so it does provide an ending to the book of Mark. But I love that that Jesus, Bob, when he was talking about the ascension and talking about Jesus's resurrection, said, Scripture itself, in some ways, is completed, but in other ways, is still being written because we're the living letters of what happens next.
Which is just a beautiful picture to consider of us as God's church. You know, I really love that.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Beautifully done. Beautifully done, Bobo.
Bobo. That's a Nick Englerism.
Yeah.
Last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to you for your closing thoughts, Kate, is he says they'll speak in new tongues, they'll pick up snakes with their hands, they'll drink deadly poison, it won't hurt them at all, place their hands on sick people. These are just the things that were like happening, right? So Peter, James, John, Paul, Barnabas, all the apostles were driving out demons. At Pentecost, all the apostles were speaking in different tongues. Paul picks up a snake in his travels, gets bit, and it doesn't hurt him. And it looks like it was probably a poisonous snake. They place their hands on sick people and they get well. These are just the things that are happening. But one of the things I see kind of implied in the text is that these people, the signs that accompany those who believe, is that they are overflowing with the life and light of heaven. Right? That if they are a cup, they are overflowing with it. Hence why the demons leave. Hence why language isn't a barrier. Hence why things that would normally kill them can't. Hence why sick people get well. That, like we've talked about in other parts of the book of Mark, these are not magic tricks. These are characteristics of the kingdom of heaven. That where there is dis-ease, that is made right. Where there is disordered, there is order. Where there is death, there is life. Where there is hell, heaven takes over. And that nothing is a barrier to God's kingdom, not even a different language. So I think that these are just characteristics of the kingdom of heaven, not like a checklist of magic tricks. And that Jesus says we'll do even greater things than these. And I think that God is infinitely creative in how he empowers us by his presence to embody the kingdom of heaven on earth.
Those are great observations, Alex. Thanks for breaking down the signs part of it. I think that is a really important thing for us to talk about. I think it's easy to get caught up in some of the details and like, but are those things happening? And, all the questions. And I have lots of conversations with people about that. And so my final thoughts are just Jesus's last words of go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. And that's in Matthew as well. Right. And it's like, I just think that it's so easy to get caught up in what it should look like and how we should be living, and all of the whole entire Bible. And it's very complex and complicated. And the simplification of what were Jesus's last words and what did he ask us to do? And how can we fully embody that today and bring the kingdom from heaven down to earth and really embody that? And it's just sharing the gospel with people, offering them the truth about who Jesus is, and then trusting the Lord to do the rest. That there is a consequence for not believing in Jesus. And that's scary and intimidating. And but also the freedom that comes with surrender is transformative. And I think that living into that, the simplicity of the gospel, it's complicated. It's not a complicated thing to do. It can be a complicated thing to understand when we have so much of the world all around us. It's simple. It's not easy. And I think that is how the Gospels all end, is just with Jesus's last words. And I just think it's really important and helpful to focus on who is Jesus to me and how can I share about his hope and transformation with the people in my life, and not with the goal of trying to fix them or change them, but just saying I have experienced a better way, and it's through surrender.
Yeah. And, that's, I think, what's so important about Jesus's model of discipleship was that these people spent 3 years with him, doing life with him, not understanding a lot.
So many questions of like, what you mean, Jesus?
And I mean, like, it's not even till 300 years after that the church even decides Jesus is actually God. So there's just like so much that Jesus he's not worried about us like understanding everything, but he is concerned about us embodying things. And the reason we embody it is the same reason Mary Magdalene embodied it, is my life is totally different because I'm with Jesus. And, Revelation 12:11 says we've overcome the devil by the blood of Jesus and the word of our testimony. And the degree to which God has changed us, I believe, is the degree to which we believe and can embody the gospel.
Yeah.
And the deeper God changes us, the more we taste the life and light of Jesus, and the more we can preach the gospel because we are living it, And I think that's a big mistake a lot of American Christians make, is our whole education system is, let me help you understand this for a couple of years, and then you can start doing something about it. And the education system of Jesus is just do stuff with me for a couple years, and then things will start to make sense.
Yeah. I love it. I love it.
All right. Mark chapter 16. If anything stood out to you guys, or there are things that you wanted us to talk about, send us a message on Facebook. You can email us at the contact page on our website at lifechurchlivonia.org. You can drop a comment here on YouTube.
Yep, we love hearing from you.
We do. So thank you for joining us as we talk about Mark 16. Join us next week as we talk about how to actually embody the gospel and not just learn about it or understand it. And then the week after, we start off with a new way to be human.
Boom.
Boom. Deuces in the spirit. Shalom, me homies.